The fluorescent lights of Sterling and Associates hummed their familiar tune as Marcus Cole pushed his cleaning cart down the 32nd floor hallway. It was 9:47 p.m. on a Thursday in late October, and the Chicago skyline glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows like a constellation of corporate ambition. Most of the offices sat empty now, their occupants long gone to warm dinners and waiting families. But Marcus preferred it this way: the silence, the solitude, the invisibility. He paused outside Conference Room A, catching his reflection in the glass. 53 years old, gray threading through what had once been jet-black hair, lines carved deep around eyes that had seen too much. The navy blue janitor's uniform hung loose on a frame that used to fill out tailored suits from Brooks Brothers. That was another life, he reminded himself, another man. He pushed through the door and began his routine, emptying trash bins, wiping down the mahogany table that probably cost more than his annual salary, straightening the leather chairs that partners sat in to decide the fates of corporations and criminals alike. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory from 3 years of the same motions, the same rooms, the same quiet. A photograph on the wall caught his attention, as it always did. The firm's founder, Richard Sterling, shaking hands with the mayor at some charity gala 15 years ago. Sterling had died 8 months ago, heart attack at his desk, they said. 71 years old and still billing 60 hours a week. The man never learned how to stop. Marcus understood that now. The inability to stop. The way work could become a hiding place, a bunker against the bombs life kept dropping. He was reaching for the window cleaner when voices echoed from the hallway. Sharp, impatient, getting closer. Told Harrison the brief needed to be on my desk by 6. 6, David. Not 6:15, not 6:30. 6. A woman's voice, clear as a bell and twice as cutting. Ms. Sterling, I apologize. The associates were doing what associates do, which is apparently everything except what I ask. The door swung open, and Marcus instinctively stepped back, lowering his eyes. Old habit. Don't be seen. Don't take up space. Elena Sterling swept into the conference room like a winter storm in Louboutin heels. 38 years old, with her father's sharp cheekbones and her mother's auburn hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a charcoal Armani suit that fit her like armor, and her green eyes scanned the room with the efficiency of someone who calculated the value of every second. Behind her trailed David Chen, the senior partner who'd been running the firm's litigation department for 20 years. He looked like a man who'd aged 5 of those years in the past 8 months. "We need this room," Elena said, not looking at Marcus. "The Hartwell deposition prep starts in 10 minutes. "Of course, ma'am." Marcus gathered his supplies quickly, efficiently. "I'll come back later to finish." "Don't bother. We'll be here until midnight at least." She was already spreading files across the table, her attention laser-focused on the documents. "Just make sure the trash is emptied on your way out." "Yes, ma'am." He was almost to the door when his cart's wheel caught on the carpet edge. The bucket of cleaning solution wobbled, and before he could steady it, a splash of soapy water arced through the air and landed on the corner of Elena's open briefcase. Time stopped. Elena turned slowly, her expression shifting from irritation to something colder, something that reminded Marcus of prosecutors he'd once faced across courtroom aisles. The good ones. The ones who could freeze a defendant with a single look. "I'm so sorry," Marcus said, already reaching for the paper towels on his cart. "Let me—" "Don't!" The word was a scalpel. "You've done enough." "Elena," David started, "it was an accident. An accident that just soaked documents from a $50 million acquisition." She pulled the briefcase away, dabbing at the papers with her sleeve. "This is exactly what I'm talking about, David. Attention to detail. Care. Does anyone in this building understand what's at stake?" She turned to Marcus then, really looking at him for the first time. Her eyes swept over his uniform, his gray hair, his weathered hands still clutching the paper towels. "You're the night janitor, aren't you? Cole or something?" "Yes, ma'am. Marcus Cole." "Well, Marcus Cole." Her voice dripped with exhaustion more than cruelty, but the words cut just the same. "You're just a janitor. Your one job is to clean without causing more mess. Do you think you can manage that?" Marcus felt something flicker in his chest, a spark of the old fire, the one that used to burn when opposing counsel underestimated him, but he smothered it, the way he'd learned to smother everything. "Yes, ma'am. I apologize again." He wheeled his cart out of the conference room, down the hall, into the service elevator. The doors closed, and he leaned against the cold metal wall, breathing slowly. "You're just a janitor." She wasn't wrong. That's all he was now. All he deserved to be. But as the elevator descended, Marcus's hand drifted to his chest, to the place beneath his uniform where a worn photograph hung from a cord around his neck. His daughter Lily, age 6, grinning at the camera with her mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Lily was 12 now, and she was the only reason he was still here at all. 3 floors above, Elena Sterling wiped the last of the water from her documents, unaware that the man she'd just dismissed had once stood in a courtroom not unlike the ones her firm serviced, and had spoken the words that changed her family's life forever. The old case files were still in storage. Box 47, row 12, in the basement archives. And tomorrow, Elena would have reason to go looking. Before the story continues, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. What do you think is in that old case file? And if you love stories about hidden pasts and second chances, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss what happens next. Trust me, you're going to want to see what Elena discovers about the janitor she just humiliated. The basement archives of Sterling and Associates smelled like dust and forgotten ambitions. Row after row of metal shelving stretched into the fluorescent-lit darkness, each one crammed with bankers' boxes full of cases that had once meant everything to someone. Now they sat in climate-controlled limbo, waiting for the 7-year retention period to pass before they could be shredded into oblivion. Elena Sterling hadn't been down here in years, not since she was a first-year associate, hunting for precedents at 2 a.m. while her father built an empire 30 floors above. But the Hartwell case had hit a snag. Opposing counsel was citing an old ruling from a case her father had tried in 2009, and she needed the original briefs. "Row 12, she muttered, her heels clicking against the concrete floor. "Box 47. She found it wedged between boxes 46 and 48, exactly where the index said it would be. Her father had been meticulous about organization. It was one of the few traits she'd inherited from him, along with his workaholic tendencies and his inability to admit when he was wrong. Elena hauled the box down and set it on a nearby table, sending a small cloud of dust into the air. She coughed, waving it away, and lifted the lid. The Hartwell briefs were right on top. She pulled them out, set them aside, and was about to close the box when something caught her eye. A manila folder, thicker than the others, with a red tab marking it as significant. Her father's handwriting on the label. Cole v. State of Illinois. Pro bono. Keep indefinitely. Cole. The name tugged at something in her memory. Where had she heard it recently? Marcus Cole, the janitor. Probably a coincidence. Cole was a common enough name. But curiosity had always been Elena's weakness, the quality that made her a great lawyer and a terrible sleeper. She pulled the folder out and opened it. The first page was a photograph. A man in his early 40s, clean-shaven, with sharp, intelligent eyes, and the kind of confident posture that came from years of commanding courtrooms. He wore a suit that fit him perfectly, and he was shaking hands with her father in front of the Cook County Courthouse. Elena's breath caught in her throat. She knew that face. Older now, weathered by time and tragedy, hidden beneath gray hair and a janitor's uniform, but the eyes were the same. The jawline was the same. The caption beneath the photo read, Marcus Cole, Assistant District Attorney, after successful prosecution of the Mendez cartel case, with defense attorney Richard Sterling opposing counsel. Elena sank into the nearest chair, the folder trembling in her hands. She began to read. Marcus Cole had been one of the most promising prosecutors in Illinois history, graduated top of his class from University of Chicago Law, clerked for a federal judge, joined the district attorney's office at 28, and made assistant DA by 35. He had a reputation for being brilliant, relentless, and absolutely incorruptible. And then 6 years ago, everything fell apart. The next document was a newspaper clipping from the Chicago Tribune, dated March 15, 2019. Prosecutor's wife, daughter killed in hit and run. Rebecca Cole, 42, and Maya Cole, 8, were killed Thursday evening when a vehicle struck them in a crosswalk outside Lincoln Elementary School. The driver fled the scene. Rebecca Cole was the wife of Assistant District Attorney Marcus Cole, who was reportedly working late at the courthouse at the time of the accident. Their younger daughter, Lily, 6, was not present. Elena's hand rose to her mouth. She kept reading. The driver was never caught. Marcus Cole took a leave of absence that stretched into weeks, then months. When he finally returned, colleagues said he was a ghost of himself, showing up late, missing deadlines, drinking. The final straw came when he lost a case he should have won, a slam-dunk conviction that fell apart because he failed to file a critical motion on time. He resigned before they could fire him, surrendered his law license voluntarily, and then he disappeared. Until 3 years ago, when he apparently resurfaced as a janitor at the very firm where her father had once faced him across a courtroom. Elena closed the folder and stared at the wall, her mind racing. Why here? Why Sterling and Associates? Was it coincidence or something else? And why had her father kept this file marked "Keep indefinitely"? She gathered the Hartwell briefs and the Cole folder, tucking both under her arm. The elevator ride back to the 32nd floor felt longer than usual, each floor ticking by like a heartbeat she couldn't slow. It was nearly 11 p.m. when she stepped out. The hallway was empty, most of the lights dimmed for the night. But she could see a faint glow coming from the break room at the end of the corridor. Elena walked toward it, her footsteps muffled by the carpet. Through the glass door, she could see Marcus Cole sitting alone at one of the tables. He wasn't cleaning. He was just sitting there, a cup of coffee growing cold in front of him, staring at something in his hands. A photograph. Even from this distance, she could see it was a photograph. She pushed through the door before she could talk herself out of it. Marcus looked up, startled. His hand closed around the photo instinctively, hiding it from view. When he saw who it was, something flickered across his face. Resignation, maybe, or exhaustion. "Ms. Sterling." He started to rise. "I'm sorry, I was just taking my break. I'll get back to—" "Sit down." The words came out softer than she intended. "Please." He hesitated, then slowly lowered himself back into the chair. Elena walked to the coffee machine, poured herself a cup she didn't really want, and sat down across from him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The break room hummed with the quiet sounds of refrigerators and vending machines, a fluorescent light flickering slightly overhead. "I know who you are," Elena finally said. Marcus's expression didn't change, but she saw his shoulders tense beneath the navy uniform. "I'm the night janitor, ma'am, Marcus Cole. We met earlier when you spilled water on my briefcase. Yes." She set the manila folder on the table between them. "But that's not what I mean." Marcus stared at the folder, at his own name written in her father's handwriting. Something shifted in his eyes, a crack in the careful blankness he'd been maintaining. "Where did you find that?" "The archives. I was looking for something else." She paused. "Assistant District Attorney Marcus Cole, youngest ADA in Cook County history, a 94% conviction rate. My father called you the most formidable opponent he ever faced." "Your father was generous." "My father was a lot of things. Generous wasn't usually one of them." Elena leaned forward. "Why are you here, Mr. Cole? Of all the places you could have ended up, why are you mopping floors in the building where Richard Sterling built his legacy?" Marcus was quiet for a long time. His thumb traced the edge of the hidden photograph, a gesture that seemed unconscious, habitual. "Because your father asked me to be," he said finally. Elena blinked. "What?" After I lost everything, my wife, my daughter, my career, I spent 2 years trying to drink myself to death. I was living in a shelter on the south side when your father found me. Marcus's voice was steady, but Elena could hear the effort it took to keep it that way. He offered me a job, said everyone deserves a second chance, even prosecutors who used to make his life difficult. My father sought you out? Personally? Showed up at the shelter in a $3,000 suit, scared the hell out of everyone there. A ghost of a smile crossed Marcus's face. He said he'd been keeping tabs on me, said he couldn't stand to watch a good man destroy himself over something that wasn't his fault. Elena felt something shift in her chest. She had spent her entire life trying to understand her father, his obsession with work, his emotional distance, his inability to say, "I love you," without making it sound like a closing argument. And here was this stranger, this janitor, revealing a side of Richard Sterling she had never known existed. "He never told me," she said quietly. "He asked me not to tell anyone, said it would be easier for both of us if I was just invisible." Marcus finally looked up, meeting her eyes. "I'm good at invisible now. It's the only thing I'm still good at." Elena thought of the photograph hidden in his palm, the way he'd instinctively protected it, like it was the most precious thing he owned. "Your daughter," she said. "Lily. The article said she survived." The crack in Marcus's composure widened. He nodded slowly. "She's 12 now. Lives with my sister in Evanston. I see her on weekends when I'm—" He stopped, swallowed. "When I'm having good days." "And the bad days?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to. Elena looked at the man across from her, really looked the way she hadn't bothered to earlier. She saw the grief etched into every line of his face, the quiet dignity he maintained despite the uniform, despite the mop and bucket, despite the way people like her looked right through him. She saw someone who had lost everything and was still, somehow, trying to survive. "I owe you an apology," she said. "For earlier. What I said was true." Marcus shrugged. "I am just a janitor now, and I did make a mess of your documents." "That's not—" Elena stopped, frustrated. "You're not just anything. You were brilliant. You were important. My father kept your file for 15 years because he respected you. Respected who I was." Marcus stood, tucking the photograph back into his shirt pocket. "That man doesn't exist anymore, Ms. Sterling. He died on a crosswalk outside Lincoln Elementary, along with everyone who mattered to him." He picked up his cold coffee and walked to the sink, pouring it out with the careful movements of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible. "I should get back to work. The 29th floor still needs vacuuming." He was almost to the door when Elena spoke again. "Mr. Cole." She waited until he turned. "Would you like to have coffee sometime? Real coffee, not from a vending machine. There's a place on Michigan Avenue that makes a decent cortado." Marcus stared at her, genuinely confused. "Why?" "Because my father saw something in you worth saving, and I think—" She hesitated, surprising herself with the honesty that came next. "I think I could use someone to talk to who knew him, who understood him in a way I never did." The fluorescent light flickered again. In the distance, an elevator chimed. "I'm not very good company these days," Marcus said finally. "Neither am I." Elena allowed herself a small smile. "Apparently, I yell at janitors for minor accidents and work until midnight on cases that won't matter in 5 years. We can be terrible company together." Something shifted in Marcus's expression. Not quite a smile, but close. The first sign of warmth she'd seen from him. "There's a coffee shop on the ground floor," he said. "Millie's. It's open until midnight. I take my break at 10 most nights." "I know Millie's. The owner puts too much foam on everything." "She does." This time, it was almost a smile. "But she also doesn't ask questions, and she makes a decent cortado." He pushed through the door and disappeared down the hallway, his cart squeaking softly as he went. Elena sat alone in the break room, the manila folder, still open on the table in front of her. She looked at the photograph of Marcus Cole shaking hands with her father, two men at the height of their powers, neither one knowing what was coming. Tomorrow she would have a mountain of depositions to review and a client who expected miracles. But tonight she found herself thinking about second chances, about invisible men who used to be giants, about fathers who kept secrets and janitors who carried photographs next to their hearts, and about a coffee shop that stayed open until midnight, where a woman who worked too much might find someone who understood what it meant to lose everything. 3 weeks later, Elena found herself sitting across from Marcus Cole at Millie's coffee shop for the 7th time. It had become a ritual, though neither of them called it that. Every few nights, when the depositions blurred together and the silence of the 32nd floor became unbearable, Elena would take the elevator down to the ground floor. Marcus would already be there, tucked into the corner booth with a cortado and a paperback novel, always something unexpected. Dostoevsky one night, Stephen King the next, a battered copy of Charlotte's Web that he explained belonged to his daughter. They talked about small things at first, the weather, the news, the way Millie always put too much foam on everything but made up for it with the best almond croissants in Chicago, safe topics, surface conversations. But tonight felt different. November had arrived with a bitter wind that rattled the windows of the little coffee shop. Outside, the first snowflakes of the season drifted down through the glow of streetlights, dusting Michigan Avenue in white. Inside, Millie had turned up the heat and put on a jazz playlist that reminded Elena of her father's office. Marcus sat across from her, both hands wrapped around his cup as if drawing warmth from it. He looked tired tonight, more tired than usual. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there last week, and his shoulders carried a weight that seemed heavier than the mop and bucket waiting for him upstairs. "What is it?" Elena asked softly. "You seem far away." Marcus glanced up, surprised. Then he let out a breath that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "It's November 12th, he said quietly. Elena waited. She had learned over these weeks that Marcus spoke in his own time. Pushing only made him retreat further into himself. Maya's birthday. His voice cracked on the name. She would have been 14 today. The jazz music played on, a saxophone solo, mournful and sweet. Elena reached across the table and laid her hand over his. She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. Rebecca wanted to throw her a big party that year, Marcus continued, his eyes fixed on some point in the middle distance. Maya was turning 8. She was obsessed with unicorns and rainbows and this cartoon about a magical horse. Rebecca spent weeks planning it. Custom invitations, a 3-tier cake from that bakery on Halstead, Sweet Mandy B's. She even rented a bounce house shaped like a castle. He paused, and Elena saw his throat work as he swallowed. The party was supposed to be on March 16th, a Saturday. But Maya's actual birthday was March 15th, a Friday, and she insisted on doing something special that day, too. She wanted to go to this ice cream place after school, Jenny's, the one on Southport. Said they had a flavor called Brambleberry Crisp that was, quote, the best thing in the entire universe. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. It vanished almost immediately. I was supposed to pick them up, Rebecca, Maya, and Lily. I was supposed to leave the office at 5 and meet them at Lincoln Elementary, and we were all going to walk to Jenny's together. Marcus's hand trembled beneath Elena's. But I didn't leave at 5. I didn't leave at 5:30. There was a case, the Mendez appeal. Your father was on the other side, actually. And I convinced myself that one more hour wouldn't matter, that Rebecca would understand, that the girls could wait. Elena felt something cold settle in her stomach. She knew where this was going. She had read the newspaper clipping, but hearing it from him, watching the words tear themselves out of his throat, was something else entirely. Rebecca texted me at 5:45. She said the girls were getting restless. She said they'd start walking toward Jenny's and I could meet them there. Marcus closed his eyes. I texted back, sounds good, and went back to my brief. I didn't even look up from my desk. The coffee shop seemed to shrink around them. The jazz faded to a murmur. There was only Marcus's voice, rough with 6 years of grief, and the snow falling silently outside. The intersection at Southport and Grace has a crosswalk, a painted crosswalk with a traffic light. Rebecca was holding Lily's hand on one side and Maya's on the other. They waited for the walk signal. They did everything right. His eyes opened, and Elena saw tears gathering at the corners. He made no move to wipe them away. The driver ran the red light going 50 in a 30 zone. Witnesses said he never even touched the brakes. He hit Rebecca and Maya in the crosswalk and kept going, just kept going. Like they were nothing, like they were trash in the road. Marcus. Elena's voice was barely a whisper. Lily survived because Rebecca pushed her. In that last second, Rebecca saw the car coming and she shoved Lily backward onto the sidewalk, hard enough to break her wrist, hard enough to save her life. Marcus's voice broke completely. My wife's last act on this earth was saving our daughter, and I wasn't there. I was 15 blocks away, arguing about legal precedents while my family died in a crosswalk. The tears spilled over now, tracking down his weathered cheeks. Elena felt her own eyes burning. I got the call at 6:23. I remember the exact time because I looked at my phone and thought it was Rebecca calling to ask where I was. But it wasn't Rebecca. It was a police officer. He said there had been an accident. He said I needed to come to Northwestern Memorial immediately. He said... Marcus stopped, his breath hitching. He said they were doing everything they could. He pulled his hand away from Elena's and pressed both palms against his eyes, as if trying to hold himself together through sheer physical pressure. Rebecca was pronounced dead at 6:41. She never regained consciousness. Maya held on until 7:15. I got to hold her hand at the end. I got to tell her I loved her, that Daddy was there, that everything was going to be okay. A sob escaped him. I lied to my daughter as she died. I told her everything was going to be okay, and then she closed her eyes, and nothing was ever okay again. Elena was crying now, too. She couldn't help it. The grief in his voice was a physical thing, filling the small coffee shop like floodwater, drowning everything. Lily was in the pediatric ward with her broken wrist, 6 years old. She kept asking for her mommy and her sister. She kept asking why Daddy was crying. And I couldn't... His voice shattered. I couldn't tell her. I couldn't form the words. My sister had to do it. Grace had to sit my 6-year-old daughter down and explain that Mommy and Maya had gone to heaven, and they weren't coming back, and none of it was her fault. Marcus lowered his hands. His face was wet, his eyes red-rimmed, but he met Elena's gaze directly. They never caught him, the driver. He abandoned the car in an alley on the west side. It was stolen, no prints, no witnesses who got a good look at his face. 6 years, and he's still out there somewhere, living his life. While Rebecca and Maya are in the ground at Rose Hill Cemetery, and Lily wakes up screaming from nightmares, and I push a mop around the building where your father used to beat me in court. He laughed then, a broken sound that held no humor at all. You asked me once why I'm here, why Sterling and Associates of all places. The truth is, I don't know. Maybe because your father was the only person who bothered to look for me. Maybe because I needed to be somewhere that reminded me of who I used to be. Or maybe... He paused, staring into his cold cortado. Maybe I just needed to be somewhere, anywhere, because the alternative was not being anywhere at all. Elena stood up. She walked around the table, and she did something she hadn't done with anyone in years. She wrapped her arms around Marcus Cole and held him while he cried. He resisted at first. His body went rigid, as if he'd forgotten what human comfort felt like. But then something gave way, and he leaned into her, his shoulders shaking with sobs that had been held back for far too long. Millie glanced over from behind the counter. She didn't say anything. She just dimmed the lights a little and turned up the music, giving them what privacy she could. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, two broken people held each other in a corner booth, learning that grief shared is grief halved, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can offer someone is simply your presence. When Marcus finally pulled back, his eyes were swollen but clearer, as if something toxic had been drained from a wound that had been festering for years. I'm sorry, he said hoarsely. I didn't mean to. Don't. Elena kept her hand on his shoulder. Don't apologize for being human. He looked at her then, really looked, and for the first time she saw something other than grief in his eyes, something fragile and tentative, something that might, in another life, have been hope. Thank you, he whispered, for listening, for staying. Elena squeezed his shoulder. That's what friends do. The word hung in the air between them. Friends. It felt too small for what had just passed between them, and too large for two people who had known each other barely a month. But it was a start. Weeks passed, slowly turning into months. November's snow gave way to December's bitter cold, then to the gray slush of January, and finally to the first tentative hints of February thaw. And somewhere in between the seasons, something shifted. Elena stopped counting the coffee meetings. They happened almost every night now, sometimes at Millie's, sometimes in the break room on the 32nd floor, sometimes on a bench in Millennium Park when the weather allowed. They talked about everything and nothing, cases she was working on, books he was reading, the peculiar satisfaction of a perfectly organized filing cabinet, the way grief could ambush you at unexpected moments, in the cereal aisle at Whole Foods or during a commercial for minivans, or when you heard a song that someone you loved used to hum. Marcus began to change. The transformation was subtle at first, a slight straightening of his shoulders, a quicker smile, a willingness to meet people's eyes instead of staring at the floor. He started wearing clothes that fit him better. He got a haircut from somewhere other than the barber college on State Street. One night, Elena caught him laughing at something Millie said, really laughing, and she realized it was the first time she'd heard that sound from him. You should do that more often, she told him later, as they walked back toward the Sterling building through the cold February air. Do what? Laugh. It suits you. Marcus ducked his head, but she could see the faint flush creeping up his neck. I'm out of practice. Then practice. She bumped her shoulder against his. I'll help. I have a whole collection of terrible lawyer jokes. God help me. But he was smiling when he said it. The first time Elena met Lily was an accident. A Saturday in late February, unseasonably warm, and Elena had stopped by Millie's for her usual cortado on her way to the office. She wasn't, expecting to see Marcus. He didn't work weekends, but there he was in their usual booth, and across from him sat a girl with auburn hair and her father's stubborn chin. Elena froze in the doorway. She should leave. This was private. This was family. But then Lily looked up and spotted her, and Marcus followed his daughter's gaze, and it was too late to retreat. Ms. Sterling. Marcus stood, something uncertain flickering across his face. I didn't expect to see you today. I was just picking up coffee. Elena gestured vaguely toward the counter. I can go. I don't want to interrupt. You're not interrupting. It was Lily who spoke, her voice bright and curious. Dad talks about you all the time. You're the lady who runs his building, right? The one who likes books about murder? Elena blinked. Murder mysteries. Yes, I suppose that's me. I'm Lily. The girl extended her hand with a formality that was somehow both charming and heartbreaking. I'm 12. I like murder mysteries, too. Have you read And Then There Were None? It's really good. Everyone dies. Lily. Marcus's voice carried a gentle warning. What? They do. That's not a spoiler. It's on the back cover. Elena felt something crack open in her chest. She looked at this girl. This bright, brave, damaged girl who had watched her mother push her to safety and had spent 6 years living with that impossible gift. And she felt tears threatening behind her eyes. I have read it, Elena said, sliding into the booth beside Marcus. I think I was about your age, actually. My father gave it to me. Was your dad cool? Lily, it's okay. Elena smiled at Marcus before turning back to his daughter. My dad was complicated. He worked a lot. But he loved Agatha Christie. He said she understood that everyone has secrets, and the best stories are about what happens when those secrets come out. Lily considered this with the gravity of a Supreme Court justice. That's pretty smart. He had his moments. From that day forward, Lily became part of their constellation. Saturday brunches at Millie's became a tradition, pancakes for Lily, cortados for the adults, and conversations that ranged from school drama to true crime podcasts to the eternal question of whether Batman could beat Superman in a fair fight. Batman, Lily declared one morning in March, waving a syrup-covered fork for emphasis. Obviously. He doesn't have any powers, Marcus pointed out. He has preparation and money. Money is basically a superpower. Elena laughed so hard she nearly choked on her coffee. When she recovered, she found Marcus watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Something soft, something wondering, as if he were seeing her for the first time. Later that night, alone in her apartment on Lakeshore Drive, Elena stood at her window and watched the city lights shimmer across the dark water. She thought about the way Marcus had looked at her, the way his hand had brushed against hers when they reached for the check at the same time, the way her heart had stuttered at the contact, like an engine turning over after a long winter. I'm falling for him, she realized. The thought should have terrified her. She was Elena Sterling, CEO of a firm that billed $300 million a year. He was a janitor who pushed a mop around her building. The tabloids would have a field day. The board would question her judgment. Her mother would call from Palm Beach to express her concerns in that tone that meant, "Have you completely lost your mind?" But standing there in the darkness, watching the lake ripple beneath the stars, Elena found that she didn't care about any of it. She cared about the way Marcus made her feel seen. She cared about the way he listened when she talked. Really listened, as if her words were precious things worth holding on to. She cared about Lily's laugh and Marcus's slow-blooming smile and the way they had somehow become the best part of her exhausting, empty, successful life. The next Saturday, Elena arrived at Millie's with a gift wrapped in purple paper. "What's this?" Lily eyed the package suspiciously. "It's not my birthday." "I know. Open it anyway." Lily tore into the wrapping to reveal a first edition of Murder on the Orient Express, slightly worn but beautifully preserved. Her eyes went wide. "This is really old." 1934. It was my father's. He gave it to me when I was your age, and now... Elena swallowed around the sudden lump in her throat. "Now I'd like you to have it." Lily stared at the book, then at Elena, then back at the book. Her lower lip trembled. "But it's special. It was your dad's." "That's why I want you to have it." Elena reached across the table and squeezed the girl's hand. "Books are meant to be passed on, Lily. Stories are meant to be shared. And I think my father would have liked knowing his favorite book ended up with someone who appreciates a good murder mystery." Lily clutched the book to her chest like a treasure. Then she slid out of the booth, walked around the table, and hugged Elena with the fierce, uncomplicated love that only children can offer. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll take really good care of it." "I know you will, sweetheart." Over Lily's shoulder, Elena met Marcus's eyes. He was crying silently, tears tracking down his cheeks, but he was smiling too, that rare, radiant smile that transformed his whole face. "Thank you," he mouthed. Elena just nodded, holding his daughter close, feeling for the first time in years like she might actually be part of something bigger than herself, something that looked, against all odds, like a family. The first warning sign came on a Tuesday in late March. Elena was in the executive conference room on the 34th floor reviewing quarterly projections with the board of directors when Victoria Ashworth leaned back in her leather chair and smiled the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. "I hear you've been spending quite a bit of time with the night staff, Elena." Victoria's voice was silk wrapped around a blade. "The janitor, specifically. Marcus something or other." The room went quiet. 11 pairs of eyes turned toward Elena, waiting. "Mr. Cole is an employee of this firm," Elena said evenly, keeping her expression neutral. I don't see how my interactions with staff members are relevant to this meeting. Of course not. Victoria's smile widened. I just find it interesting. The CEO of Sterling and Associates having coffee dates with the man who empties her trash. Some might call it admirably egalitarian. Others might call it... She paused, letting the silence do her work for her. Well, others might call it something else entirely. Elena felt heat rising in her cheeks but refused to look away. If you have something to say, Victoria, I suggest you say it plainly. I'm simply concerned about appearances, dear. Your father built this firm on reputation, on prestige. And while I'm sure Mr. Cole is a perfectly nice man, one has to wonder what our clients would think if they knew the woman handling their $100 million mergers was romantically involved with the help. The word landed like a slap. The help. This meeting is adjourned, Elena said, her voice cold enough to frost the windows. We'll reconvene Thursday to finish the quarterly review. Victoria, I'd like a word with you privately. She didn't wait for a response. She gathered her files and walked out of the conference room, her heels striking the marble floor like gunshots. What Elena didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that Marcus had been in the hallway outside the conference room. He'd been replacing a light bulb in the ceiling fixture, standing on a ladder that put him at just the right height to hear every word through the door that hadn't quite latched. The help. Romantically involved with the help. He climbed down from the ladder slowly, methodically. He gathered his tools. He walked to the service elevator and pressed the button for the basement, where he sat in the supply closet for 20 minutes, staring at the concrete wall. Victoria Ashworth wasn't wrong. That was the thing that kept circling through his mind like a vulture. She wasn't wrong. Elena was brilliant and beautiful and powerful, the heir to a legal empire, a woman who dined with senators and argued cases before the Supreme Court, and he was a 53-year-old janitor who couldn't even keep his own family safe. What was he doing? What did he think was going to happen? That Elena Sterling would introduce him to her colleagues as her boyfriend? That they'd attend charity galas together, her in designer gowns and him in a rented tuxedo, while people whispered behind their hands about the CEO who'd lost her mind? And Lily. God, what about Lily? His daughter was finally starting to heal. She was finally starting to trust again, to open her heart to the possibility of happiness. And he had let her get attached to Elena, let her start dreaming of a family that could never exist, because he'd been too selfish to see the truth. He didn't deserve this. He didn't deserve any of it. That night, Marcus didn't go to Millie's for their usual coffee. He texted Elena at 9:47 p.m. Not feeling well. Rain check. She responded immediately. Of course. Feel better. Call if you need anything. He didn't call. The next night, he texted again, covering a shift for another custodian. Sorry. The night after that, Lily's sick. At my sister's. By the fourth night, Elena stopped texting first. She sat alone in the break room until 11 p.m., staring at her phone, waiting for a message that never came. On Saturday, she drove to Millie's for their usual brunch, but the corner booth sat empty. She waited for an hour, ordered 3 cortados she didn't drink. Finally, she asked Millie if she'd seen Marcus. He was here earlier, Millie said, wiping down the counter with a rag that had seen better days. Came in around 7, got a coffee to go, looked like he hadn't slept in a week. She gave Elena a knowing look. You two have a fight or something? I don't know. Elena stared at the empty booth. I honestly don't know. She tried calling him that afternoon. It went to voicemail. She left a message, keeping her voice carefully casual. Hey, it's me. I missed you at Millie's this morning. Just wanted to make sure you're okay. Call me back when you get a chance. He didn't call back. Monday night, Elena stayed late at the office, pretending to work on briefs, but really just waiting, hoping. At 9:30, she heard the familiar squeak of his cart in the hallway. She stood up so fast she knocked over her coffee cup, sending cold liquid spreading across her desk. Marcus. She caught him outside her office door. He was thinner than he'd been a week ago, his face pale and drawn, dark circles carved beneath his eyes. "What's going on? Why have you been avoiding me?" He didn't meet her gaze. His hands tightened on the cart handle until his knuckles went white. "I haven't been avoiding you, Ms. Sterling. I've just been busy." "Ms. Sterling." The formality hit her like a punch to the stomach. "Don't do that." Her voice cracked. "Don't call me that. Not after everything we've—" "Everything we've what?" Now he looked at her, and what she saw in his eyes made her breath catch. Pain, resignation, a terrible, practiced emptiness. "We've had coffee a few times. We've talked. That's all it was. That's all it can be." "That's not true." Elena stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Marcus, please. Whatever's happened, whatever's changed, we can talk about it. Just tell me what's wrong." For a moment, just a moment, she saw the mask slip. She saw the man who had wept in her arms at Millie's, who had laughed at his daughter's jokes, who had looked at her across a table like she was something precious. Then the mask slid back into place. "You should find someone else to have coffee with, Ms. Sterling." His voice was flat, empty. "Someone who belongs in your world. I'm just the janitor. That's all I've ever been." He pushed past her, his cart squeaking down the hallway, and Elena stood frozen in the doorway of her office, watching him disappear around the corner. The help. The words echoed in her mind, and suddenly she understood. Someone had said something. Someone had made him feel small, had reminded him of all the reasons he believed he didn't deserve happiness. She thought of Victoria Ashworth's smile, the conference room door that hadn't quite latched, and something inside Elena Sterling, something that had been dormant for years, buried beneath board meetings and billable hours, caught fire. Elena found Marcus's address in the HR files. A violation of company policy, probably. She didn't care. It was raining when she pulled up outside his apartment building. A modest brick walk-up in Rogers Park, the kind of place where the radiators clanked and the hallways smelled like decades of cooking from a dozen different countries. She sat in her Mercedes for a full 5 minutes, watching the rain streak down the windshield, rehearsing what she would say. Nothing sounded right. Nothing captured the hurricane of emotions tearing through her chest. Finally, she got out of the car. The rain soaked through her cashmere coat in seconds, plastering her hair to her face, but she barely noticed. She walked up the front steps, found his name on the buzzer, Cole, 3B, and pressed. No answer. She pressed again, held it longer this time. The intercom crackled. "Who is it?" His voice, rough and exhausted. "It's Elena. Let me in." A long pause. The rain hammered against the awning above her head. "Elena, you shouldn't be here." "I'm not leaving." She pressed the buzzer again, keeping her finger on it. "I will stand here and ring this bell until your neighbors call the police. Let me in, Marcus." Another pause. Then the door buzzed, and she pushed through into a narrow hallway that smelled like garlic and old wood. 3rd floor, apartment 3B. She stood outside his door, dripping rainwater onto the worn carpet, and knocked. When Marcus opened the door, she barely recognized him. He looked like he hadn't slept in days, hadn't shaved, hadn't eaten. He was wearing a faded University of Chicago t-shirt and sweatpants, and his eyes were red-rimmed in a way that told her he'd been crying. "Elena." Her name came out like a plea. "Please, just go." "No." She pushed past him into the apartment before he could stop her. "We need to talk." The apartment was small but clean. A worn leather couch that had seen better days. A bookshelf overflowing with paperbacks. A small kitchen with a coffee maker and not much else. And on every surface, photographs. Rebecca and the girls at the beach. Maya in a school play costume. Lily as a toddler, covered in birthday cake. A wedding photo. Marcus young and hopeful, his arm around a beautiful woman with auburn hair and a smile that could light up a room. Elena's heart clenched. This was his life. This was everything he'd lost, preserved in frames like butterflies pinned under glass. "I know what happened," she said, turning to face him. "I know you heard what Victoria said in that board meeting. I know that's why you've been pushing me away." Marcus stood by the door, as if ready to bolt from his own apartment. Doesn't matter what I heard. It matters to me. Elena stepped toward him. Victoria Ashworth is a bitter, small-minded woman who's been trying to undermine me since I took over this firm. What she said was cruel and wrong, and I've already informed her that her position on the board is being reviewed. You didn't have to do that. Yes, I did, because she insulted someone I care about. Another step closer. Because she made you feel like you're less than you are. And I will not stand for that. Not from her, not from anyone. Marcus shook his head, backing away until his shoulders hit the wall. Elena, you don't understand. She wasn't wrong. I am the janitor. I am the help. I clean toilets and empty trash cans and mop floors that people like you walk across without even seeing me. His voice cracked. You're the CEO of a 200-person law firm. You went to Harvard. You argue cases in front of the Supreme Court. And I can't even... He stopped, pressing the heels of his hands against his eyes. I can't even keep my own daughter. I see her on weekends, Elena. Weekends, because I'm too broken to take care of her full time. What could I possibly offer you? Everything. The word came out fierce, unwavering. You offer me everything, Marcus. He looked up at her, stunned. Elena crossed the remaining distance between them. She reached up and took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. You want to know what you offer me? You offer me honesty. You offer me conversation that isn't about billable hours or client retention or quarterly projections. You offer me someone who sees me, actually sees me, as Elena, not as Richard Sterling's daughter or the CEO or the woman on the 34th floor. Her voice trembled, but she pushed through. You offer me Saturday mornings with Lily, arguing about Batman versus Superman. You offer me coffee at midnight with a man who reads Dostoevsky and Stephen King in the same week. You offer me a chance to be part of something real, something true, something that has nothing to do with money or status or any of the things I thought mattered. She was crying now. She hadn't even noticed when the tears started. I have been alone for so long, Marcus, surrounded by people, but alone. My father worked himself to death, and my mother lives in Palm Beach with husband number 4. And I have colleagues, but not friends. And I have money, but not peace. And then you... Her breath hitched. Then you showed up with your sad eyes and your quiet dignity, and your daughter, who thinks money is a superpower, and I started to remember what it felt like to be happy. Marcus was trembling beneath her hands. Elena, I am in love with you. She said it clearly, deliberately, letting each word land like a stone in still water. I am in love with you, Marcus Cole, not because of who you were or what you used to have, because of who you are right now, in this moment, in this apartment. The man who survived the worst thing a person can survive. The man who gets up every day and keeps going even when he doesn't want to. The man who loves his daughter so much that he let her live somewhere she could be happy, even though it broke his heart. She brushed her thumbs across his cheekbones, wiping away tears she hadn't realized he was shedding. You asked what you could offer me. You offer me hope. You offer me a second chance. And I don't care if Victoria Ashworth or the board or the entire legal profession thinks that's beneath me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You are not beneath me, Marcus. You never were. You are exactly where I need you to be. For a long moment, Marcus didn't move, didn't speak, didn't breathe. Then something broke open in his eyes. The last wall, the final defense. And he pulled her into his arms with a desperation that stole her breath. I was so scared, he whispered against her hair. I was so scared of ruining your life, of not being enough, of dragging you down into the wreckage of who I've become. You're not wreckage. She pulled back just enough to look at him. You're a survivor, and I would rather stand in the wreckage with you than stand alone in any palace. He kissed her then. Softly at first, tentatively, as if asking permission. When she responded, pressing closer, the kiss deepened into something that tasted like rain and tears and the first breath after nearly drowning. Outside, the storm continued to rage. But inside the small apartment in Rogers Park, surrounded by photographs of lost love and second chances. Two broken people held each other and finally let themselves believe that happiness was still possible. When they finally pulled apart, Marcus rested his forehead against hers. His eyes were still wet, but he was smiling, really smiling, for the first time in days. "Elena Sterling," he said softly, "what did I do to deserve you?" "You left a seat at the table," she whispered back, and I decided to sit down. The rain gentled outside the window, fading from a roar to a murmur. And somewhere in the city, in a house in Evanston, a 12-year-old girl was about to learn that her father had found something he'd lost a long time ago. Hope. The hardest conversation wasn't with the board. It wasn't with Victoria Ashworth, who resigned 2 weeks later, rather than face the ethics review Elena had initiated. It wasn't even with Elena's mother, who called from Palm Beach to express her concerns, and ended up crying happy tears when Elena told her, for the first time in 30 years, that she was in love. The hardest conversation was with Lily. They had it on a Sunday afternoon in early April, at the house in Evanston where Marcus's sister Grace had been raising Lily for the past 5 years. The living room was warm with spring sunlight, dust motes dancing in the golden beams, and the smell of Grace's famous cinnamon rolls drifted in from the kitchen. Marcus sat on the old floral couch, Elena beside him, their hands intertwined. Lily sat across from them in the armchair that had belonged to her grandmother, her copy of Murder on the Orient Express clutched against her chest like a shield. "So," Lily said, her voice carefully neutral, "you're dating?" "Yes." Marcus leaned forward, his free hand reaching toward his daughter. "Elena and we care about each other very much. And we wanted to tell you before anyone else, because your opinion matters more than anyone's." Lily's eyes flicked between them. She was 12 years old, but in that moment she looked ancient, a child who had learned too young that happiness could be stolen without warning. "What does that mean for us?" she asked quietly. "For our Saturdays?" "It means more Saturdays," Elena said gently. "Not fewer. It means that instead of just seeing your dad at Millie's, you might see both of us. If that's something you want." "And if it's not something I want?" The question hung in the air. Marcus felt his heart constrict. "Then we figure it out," he said. "Together. Your happiness comes first, Lily. Always. If you're not comfortable with this, if you need more time, if you need—" "Dad." Lily held up her hand, and for a moment she looked so much like Rebecca that Marcus's breath caught. "I'm not saying I don't want it. I'm just—" She trailed off, her lower lip trembling. "I'm scared." Elena released Marcus's hand and moved to kneel in front of Lily's chair. She didn't touch the girl, not yet, but she met her eyes with a steadiness that seemed to anchor the room. "I know you're scared," Elena said softly. "I'm scared too. Loving people is terrifying because it means you might lose them, and you've already lost so much, Lily, more than anyone should have to lose." A tear slipped down Lily's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. "But here's what I can promise you," Elena continued. "I'm not trying to replace your mom. No one could ever replace her. I'm not trying to take your dad away from you either. If anything, I want to give him back." She glanced at Marcus, then back at Lily. "I want to help him be the father he's been too broken to be. I want to help him come home to you, not just on weekends, really home, if that's something you'd want." Lily's chin wobbled. "You mean he could live with us again?" "If that's what you both want, if Grace agrees, if we take it slow and do it right." Elena reached out finally and took Lily's hand. "I have a very big apartment that feels very empty, and I think it would feel a lot less empty with a grumpy lawyer and a murder mystery-loving 12-year-old in it." For a long moment, Lily just stared at her. Then she launched herself out of the chair and into Elena's arms, nearly knocking her backward. "I like when you're around," Lily whispered fiercely. "Dad laughs more. He looks like Dad again instead of like a ghost. I didn't think he'd ever look like that again." Elena held her tight, her eyes meeting Marcus's over his daughter's shoulder. He was crying openly now, making no effort to hide it. "I like being around," Elena whispered back. "I like being around very much." From the kitchen doorway, Grace Cole watched the scene unfold. She was 51 years old, with her brother's stubborn chin and their mother's kind eyes. She had spent 5 years watching Marcus slowly die inside, had spent countless nights holding Lily through nightmares, had prayed to a God she wasn't sure she believed in for something, anything, to bring her brother back from the edge. Now, watching him weep with joy as the woman he loved held his daughter, Grace felt those prayers finally being answered. She caught Marcus's eye and nodded once, a gesture that carried the weight of years. "It's okay. She's good. Let yourself have this." Marcus nodded back, understanding everything his sister didn't say. The proposal came 3 months later, on the 4th of July. They were at Navy Pier, surrounded by tourists and families, and the smell of funnel cakes and lake water. Lily had run ahead to get a better view of the fireworks setup, leaving Marcus and Elena alone by the railing, the Chicago skyline glittering behind them. "Do you remember the first time we talked?" Marcus asked, his hand finding hers. "Really talked, I mean, at Millie's." "You told me I put too much faith in murder mysteries," Elena said, smiling. "I told you that was rich coming from someone who read Dostoevsky for fun. You also told me that everyone deserves a second chance." He turned to face her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Do you still believe that?" "More than ever." Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena's hand flew to her mouth. "This ring belonged to my mother," he said, his voice steady despite the tears gathering in his eyes. "She wore it for 43 years, through good times and bad, through raising 2 kids who drove her crazy and a husband who worked too much. When she died, she asked Grace to hold on to it until I found someone worth giving it to." He opened the box, revealing a simple diamond solitaire that caught the fading sunlight. "I thought that person was Rebecca, and she was everything to me. But she's been gone 6 years now, and I think," his voice cracked, "I think she'd want me to find happiness again. I think she'd want Lily to have a mother who loves her. And I know with absolute certainty that my mother would have loved you." He lowered himself to one knee. Around them, people were starting to notice, phones appearing, strangers smiling and pointing. "Elena Sterling, you saw me when I was invisible. You fought for me when I didn't know how to fight for myself. You gave my daughter a book and gave me back my hope." He held up the ring. "Will you marry me?" Elena was crying too hard to speak, so she did the only thing she could do. She pulled him to his feet and kissed him with everything she had. Behind them, someone started clapping, then someone else. Then Lily came running back from wherever she'd gone, saw what was happening, and screamed so loudly that half of Navy Pier turned to look. "Is that a yes?" Marcus managed to ask when Elena finally released him. "Yes." She was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, you ridiculous, wonderful man. It's a yes." He slid the ring onto her finger just as the first firework exploded above Lake Michigan, painting the sky in red and gold and blue. And somewhere in that crowd, a 12-year-old girl with her father's chin and her mother's eyes looked up at the 2 people who had found their way back to love, and she thought to herself, "This is what hope looks like." 1 year later, on a crisp October afternoon, Elena Sterling became Elena Cole in a ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden. The wedding was small by Sterling standards, only 80 guests instead of the 300 her mother had lobbied for. But Elena had insisted. This wasn't about showing off. This wasn't about impressing clients or cementing business relationships. This was about family, real family, the kind you choose. Marcus stood at the altar in a charcoal suit that fit him like it had been made for his body, because it had been, a gift from Elena that he'd tried to refuse 3 times before finally accepting. His gray hair was neatly trimmed, his eyes clear and bright, and when he saw Elena walking toward him on the arm of David Chen, who had offered to give her away when she mentioned she had no one to ask, He started crying before she'd made it halfway down the aisle. She was wearing her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her frame. Ivory silk and delicate lace, something old and something borrowed all at once. Her auburn hair was loose around her shoulders, the way Marcus liked it, and she carried a bouquet of white roses and forget-me-nots. But it was her smile that made Marcus's heart stop, open, unguarded, radiant with a joy he'd once thought he'd never feel again. Lily stood beside her father as the junior bridesmaid, wearing a lavender dress she'd picked out herself and clutching the first edition of Murder on the Orient Express that Elena had given her a lifetime ago. She'd insisted on carrying it instead of flowers. "Books are more important than flowers," she'd declared. "Flowers die. Stories live forever." No one had argued. The vows were simple. No lawyer's tricks, no elaborate rhetoric. Just two people standing before the ones they loved, speaking from the heart. "Marcus," Elena began, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "A year ago, I walked into a coffee shop looking for something I couldn't name. I found you sitting in a corner booth reading Dostoevsky, drinking a cortado with too much foam. I didn't know it then, but I was looking for you. I was looking for someone who would see me, really see me, and love me anyway." She reached out and took his hands. "You showed me that success isn't measured in billable hours. You showed me that strength isn't about never breaking. It's about getting back up after you do. You gave me Lily and Saturday brunches and a reason to leave the office before midnight." She laughed through her tears. "You gave me a family, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift." Marcus squeezed her hands, his own voice rough with emotion. "Elena," he said, "I spent 6 years believing I was already dead. Just a ghost pushing a mop, waiting for my body to catch up with my heart. Then you walked into a break room at 10 o'clock at night and looked at me like I was still a person, like I still mattered." He paused, swallowing hard. "You didn't save me. You did something harder than that. You made me want to save myself. You made me believe I was worth saving." He lifted her hands to his lips and kissed them softly. "I loved Rebecca with everything I had. And when I lost her, I thought that part of me was gone forever. But the heart is a stubborn thing, Elena. It keeps beating even when you beg it to stop. And my heart, my stubborn, broken, healing heart, belongs to you now, for as long as it keeps beating, and maybe even after that." When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the applause was thunderous. Millie was there, dabbing her eyes with a napkin. Grace was there, holding hands with her husband, finally allowing herself to believe her brother had made it through the darkness. Even Victoria Ashworth's replacement on the board was there, a kind woman named Patricia who had told Elena that love was always worth fighting for. But it was Lily who stole the moment. As her father kissed his new bride, the 12-year-old girl stepped forward, wrapped her arms around both of them, and whispered loud enough for the front row to hear, "We're a family now, a real one, with 3 people and too many books and Saturday pancakes forever." Marcus laughed, a full, free, joyous sound that echoed across the garden. Elena buried her face in Lily's hair and wept. After the ceremony, while guests mingled over champagne and canapes, the 3 of them slipped away for a moment. They walked to a quiet bench overlooking the lake, where the autumn leaves floated on the water like scattered gold. Elena had arranged for something special. On the bench sat 2 small bouquets of forget-me-nots, tied with lavender ribbon. Beside them, a photograph in a silver frame, Rebecca and Maya laughing, together on some long-ago summer day. Lily picked up the photograph and held it against her chest. "I miss them," she whispered. "I know, sweetheart." Marcus knelt beside her, his hand on her back. "I miss them too. Every single day." "Do you think they'd be happy? About Elena, I mean. About us." Marcus looked at the photograph, at Rebecca's smile, at Maya's eyes, and felt something settle in his chest. Not grief, exactly, something softer, something like peace. "I think your mom would say that love isn't a finite resource," he said quietly. I think she'd say that loving Elena doesn't mean loving her any less. And I think, his voice caught, I think she'd be so proud of you, Lily, for being brave enough to let someone new into your heart. Lily nodded slowly. Then she placed the photograph gently back on the bench, laid one bouquet beside it, and handed the other to Elena. For Maya, she said. She would have liked you. You both like murder stories. Elena took the bouquet with trembling hands. She knelt down, placed the flowers beside the photograph, and whispered something too soft for anyone else to hear. When she stood, her eyes were wet, but she was smiling. Thank you, she said to Lily, for sharing them with me. Lily took her hand on one side and her father's on the other. Together, the three of them walked back toward the reception, toward the music and the laughter, and the future they were building together. Behind them, the photograph sat in the golden afternoon light, watching over the family that had grown from the ashes of the one that came before. Some stories end in tragedy, some end in triumph, but the best stories, the truest ones, end in hope. And this one was just beginning. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe so you don't miss stories like this, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Have you ever been given a second chance when you thought all hope was lost? Or have you been the one to offer that chance to someone else? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. Thank you for sharing this journey with us. Until next time, remember, family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people you choose.